With the pending release of the Israeli hostages, I think it's time for a celebration. And I want to spend a little bit of time explaining how we got to this point. Our incredible president, the courageous Israeli prime minister, and what is truly history in the making in front of your eyes. But I also want to add some sober understanding, reflection, and caution. For the forces of terrorism, and there are many that operate under different names and in the darkness, they've not agreed to abandon their 7th century ideology, their bloodlust, their hate for our country, Israel, and the West, and their goal of total annihilation and control. To begin with, there should never have been any hostages in the first place. There should never have been an October 7 in the first place. There should never have been a 9/11. Whether Hamas, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, the Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, the Palestinian Authority, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Iran, and scores of other jihadist terrorist organizations, and even states, they all remain. Their mission remains. They've not agreed to abandon their fundamentalist ideology or terrorism. Nor can we expect this agreement or any agreement to accomplish that. We will not be defunding our nation's anti-terrorism programs. We will not be defunding our counterterrorism activities. We will not be eliminating our special forces, forward military bases, intelligence operations, and all the rest of our national security and domestic security infrastructure, because we know what will happen if we do. The same can be said of Israel and even most of the Arab countries. This is the reality. Our commander-in-chief clearly knows this. But let me also be clear that our president, like no president before him, has done something that is as close to a miracle as we've seen in our lifetimes. He brought all the Arab and Muslim nations together. And let me tell you something, that's not that easy. They don't always speak with one voice and are often at each other's throats, as well as, of course, Israel brought them to the table, worked out an agreement for the release of the hostages, the beginning of the end, we hope, at least for now, of what I call the Battle of Gaza. This was only possible because, in significant part, President Trump reversed Biden's anti-Israel policies, reversed Biden's arms embargo against Israel, reversed Biden's appeasement of and capitulation to the Iranian regime, which Biden was propping up and whose military he was directly and indirectly funding. And because the President Trump, made public statement after public statement, making clear that there was no daylight between the United States and Israel, President Trump backed Israel 100%. The Arab and Muslim states, they saw this. They saw our president state repeatedly and strongly that Iran would not get nuclear weapons, that the hostages must be released. He stated again and again, do not forget October 7. He used our military to attack the Houthis in Yemen. He used our missiles to help defend Israel from attacks by Iran. President Trump was and is a rock. Even more, the president rejected the efforts by the Quislings, the leftists who lead these European countries and elsewhere, who kept demanding premature ceasefires, who were undermining Israel's efforts to defend itself from the enemies surrounding them, culminating in their failed efforts at the UN to reward the Palestinian terrorists with their own country, which would have been carved out of Israel's holiest land, Judea and Samaria, the birthplace of Judaism. The president said no, no, and hell no. At the same time, the president has built or improved diplomatic and economic relations with several key Arab and Muslim states. These states, which only understand power and military might, as they are all brutal dictatorships of one form or another, saw that the president was no Joe Biden. He was and is a leader, a world leader. They realized that the president was not going to equivocate. He was the best friend Israel ever had, and he was not going to sell out Israel or buckle to domestic and media pressure. He meant what he said, and even more, he would act as he said he would act. So he offered the Arab and Muslim countries diplomatic and economic opportunities to improve their own countries and their own security, as well as ours. Again, only President Trump had this foresight. There was no better evidence of the president's resolve than when he ordered our bombers to take out the nuclear sites in Iran, despite the opposition in the Democrat Party, despite the opposition in the media, despite the opposition from the Neanderthal, Israel-hating isolationists in our own country. External pressures from, again, these quislings in Europe, the UN and the rest. The president, a leader, he said, these nuclear sites cannot stand. As our commander-in-chief, in defense of our country, in defense of the rest of the world, those sites had to be obliterated. And that's what he did. And the entire world saw it. And they saw that despite past American presidents talking about eliminating Iran's nuclear threat, others appeasing Iran, others funding Iran, he was the only leader who meant it and did it. The president went to the United Nations, where he excoriated the American-hating, Israel-hating, Jew-hating UN. He called them out to their collective faces. He defended Western values. He condemned their anti-Semitism. He lectured them about their failures to pursue peace throughout the world. He made clear who was who and what was what. It was a tour de force. Never before was a speech of its kind delivered to every leader of every country on the planet. And I've said repeatedly, Donald Trump is a historic and iconic leader. His opponents in our country, including the Democrats and the media and others, will be nothing but footnotes to history. To the extent they're even noticed, it will be in the most negative and dismissive way. But I'm not done. There's more. The Prime Minister of the State of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is the greatest prime minister in the history of Israel. Ironically, this is why he, too, comes under withering attack from establishment and left-wing elements in his own country, in our country, in Europe, and at the UN. If he was weak, if he accommodated the terrorists with premature and bogus ceasefires, he would be praised, albeit even still reluctantly and timidly, for what would be nothing less than appeasement and indeed surrender, camouflaged as realistic and extraordinary statesmanship. Israel's been through that time and time again with feckless leaders. But like our president, the prime minister is a lion, smart and courageous. He, like our president, has to overcome the enemy within, often funded by outside dark forces, and the terrorists who surrounded his country, many of whom have funded and given aid and support from the very Arab and Muslim countries who we now praise. I don't believe the nation of Israel would have survived, certainly not as it now stands, without Netanyahu as Israel's prime minister and commander-in-chief. October 7 was supposed to be, and indeed was, the first attack in what was to be a multi-front, all-out war to destroy Israel, led by Iran and its Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis proxies. It was, again, an all-out military plan to attack Israel from the south, the north, and the east. Hezbollah with 180,000 mid- and long-range missiles, the Houthis with ballistic missiles, and Iran with 3,000 ballistic missiles, and Russian ground-to-air defense systems, all aligned against a tiny country the size of New Jersey with 9 million citizens. And on top of that, they had to fight in Gaza, Hamas, door to door, street to street, urban warfare, as we had to fight in Iraq. The toll on their IDF soldiers was high, especially since Israel did not decide to obliterate Gaza, which they could do, even right now. Obliterate Gaza, as we rightly obliterated city after city in World War II. Simultaneously, Israel had to prevent an all-out invasion from Lebanon by Hezbollah and the launching of tens of thousands of their missiles on its civilian populations. And Israel knew that it had to deal militarily, directly with Iran, who was behind it all, if it was going to win the war. The Battle of Gaza, the Battle of Lebanon, the Battle of Yemen, and the Battle of Iran. Netanyahu's domestic political enemies, who had sought to topple his government, his hostile media, the rogue prosecutors, were trying to destroy him, even in the middle of a war for his nation's very survival. Nonetheless, the Iranian regime was defeated by the IDF in 12 days, and our president took the historic step, again, despite the opposition from within and without, to take out their nuclear sites, which is what he did. Much of its leadership in Iran was decapitated by Israeli intelligence. Hezbollah has been defeated. All of its leadership was taken out by one of the most brilliant military operations ever, with exploding beepers and iPhones, pinpoint military operations. Hamas is today surrounded by the IDF, ready to be eliminated by the Israelis. The Houthis fire missiles from time to time, but they don't represent an existential threat to Israel. I'm sure the Israelis will deal with them in due course, as it has with its other enemies. In recent history, the world has seen great alliances and friendships that have done great things. Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and today, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. As before, there were press outlets and politicians who tried to come between the great alliances and the great friendships. We see this today with the relentless and constant planted anonymous stories in Western media about the relationship between our president and Israel's prime minister. But these libels will not last the test of time. They will not last the test of time, and they failed in their purpose. And so it is that we celebrate what has been achieved here in phase one of the Trump peace plan. It is truly remarkable. And I have to say personally, I'm among the luckiest people on this planet to call our president and Israel's prime minister my dear friends. What an honor. What a true honor. I also caution that World War II did not end war, but it was a tremendous victory for humanity. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the liberation of hundreds of millions of people from behind the Iron Curtain did not end the threat of Russia or the necessity of NATO and nuclear weapons. And this great and historic achievement we celebrate today, including the soon-to-be release of these hostages. Some have been murdered, tortured, starved, sexually abused by these subhuman monsters, throwbacks to the 7th century, these barbarians, these primitives, in the war between civilization in the 7th century. The fact is, their release, when it happens, should be widely celebrated, period. But evil is not extinguished. The jihadists are plotting as I speak, plotting attacks on Israel, plotting attacks on the United States, plotting attacks in Europe. This is who they are. This is their ideology. They are a death cult, a blood cult. They are the enemy behind 9/11. They are the enemy behind October 7th. We even see it in our own streets. The Marxists and the Islamists, the violence, how they want to overthrow the United States. They call us an empire. How they back Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. Vile, poisonous, violent mobs in our own country, And they're in the Middle East. I said they're in Europe. They're in Africa. They're in Africa now, slaughtering black Christians. They're in Syria, where they've slaughtered 500,000 Muslims who don't agree with them. They're in Yemen now, where they've slaughtered 250,000 Muslims. You will hear nothing about this anywhere except from me. And we must never let down our guard. The border is secure, the military buildup. We need to make sure domestic law enforcement is as strong as possible, our alliances are as strong as possible, or we will pay a terrible price again, like we did on 9/11. Remember again, this is a 7th century primitive death cult with an ideology that dates back thousands of years. They can't be negotiated with. They can't be appeased. They can't be bought off. Well, you're going to give them a country? They don't want a country. They want all the countries. They are a patient enemy that must never be underestimated. Phase 2 in the Trump peace plan, as it's being worked out, will be critical. What happens to Hamas? Where does its leadership go? Will they continue to be protected by Qatar? What about the prison release? Who exactly is being released? An awful lot of terrorists and criminals. Well, we shall see. But let me be clear. Our great president is aware of this and much more, which is why he fights this enemy at home and abroad. I'll be right back.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.